Good day, everyone. I would really take the privilege today to introduce Johan Burger, which is the Executive Business Developer of Executive Education in the UAE. And then also Karen Ashwin from the Events Production Company, not only in the UAE, but in many of the GCC countries as well as Africa. And the purpose of this recording is really to give you more background on the SABCO event that will happen on Wednesday, 2nd June in the Media One Hotel at 7:30 in the evening. And I am Nelly Swanepoel, and I'm the event and the content manager of the South African Business Council. Karen, will you take the opportunity and the privilege to talk to Johan for us, please?
Thank you so much, Nelly, and welcome, Johan. Johan, it is really exciting to have you here today, and I know that you're going to enhance the subject more on Wednesday when you speak to a larger audience, which is going to be in person, and being in the events industry, having an in-person event is really passionate and exciting to my heart. So we're happy to be back again. So the question I wanted to ask you, obviously we're talking about the largest free trade zone, that's going to accelerate trade between the Africa and the UAE. And I wanted to ask you, what makes Africa an attractive place for investment despite obvious challenges? And what current trends are interesting and which are a source of concern to you?
Hi, Karen. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and for the introduction, Nelly. As Nelly said, I'm the Business Development Manager for Executive Education at the UAE University at the College of Business and Economics. To get to your question, let's first talk about the challenges that Africa faces, because I like to end off on the positives. An obvious challenge Africa is looking at this stage of the game is one of security. We have a few areas that are a problem in Africa, such as Somalia, Nigeria, Mozambique more recently, Mali, Central African Republic, the Eastern DRC. These are areas that are obvious trouble spots at this stage of the game. Not that they're the only ones, but that's where we find them. Infrastructure can be a challenge. Transportation, roads, railways, ports, airports, energy, water, housing and offices. A third one we're looking at is food insecurity. Africa is a net importer of food between $35 and $41 billion annually. Sitting also with the problem that your farmers are aging with an average age over 60 years and with the youth leaving the industry. Africa also has, or the population rather, has a low level of access to electricity, where more than 60% of the population do not have access. Low levels of intra-Africa trade, which is one of the main drivers behind the African continental free trade area. We're looking at between about 17% intra-African trade, which is compared to the EU's 70% and Asia's 59%, quite low. And even North America, we're looking at 31%. It is easier for Africa to trade with external countries than with itself, also much cheaper. The whole issue of the digital divide, Africa needs to address this to tap into the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution. We're also looking at low levels of manufacturing contribution to GDP. Kenya, for example, looking at 9%, in spite of President Kenyatta's Big Four agenda to reach 15% by 2022, which is next year, which is not going to happen. Relative low levels of value addition, where we're looking at Africa tends to export raw materials before they add value, rather than adding value and getting the benefits thereof. So they're losing jobs, they're losing export revenues, and they're losing the benefits of import substitution. And then also the whole issue of education. Africa has a potential for demographic dividend, but development and growth on the education side is also a challenge. From an opportunity perspective, Obviously, many of these that we've looked at now can be converted into opportunities, but we need to be careful that we don't have just this kind of motherhood and apple pie approach where we take every threat and challenge as, yes, it can be an opportunity. However, they are. So now what we are looking at, for example, is the issue of a growing population, where we are looking at currently about 1.2 billion people, which is going to grow to 2.4 billion by 2050 and to over 4 billion by 2100. So we're sitting with a massive potential market. Looking at increasing urbanization, 2015, we looked at about 50% living in urban areas. Currently, we're looking at about 567 million. And by 2050, 67% of the population increase will be accommodated in cities, which adds up to about a total of 8.4 million people, which is the increase, which leaves us in total about 1.371 billion people, 57% of Africa's population by 2050. In addition to this, we're sitting with a quite stronger, rather put it this way, growing consumer class. So it makes for an attractive market, the size and the fact that the level of the consumer is growing. Agriculture, in spite of the fact that we're sitting with a scenario where we're sitting with vast imports, a lot is to be gained potentially from the modernization of agriculture. Mobile and telecoms, in the digital field, mobile money, education, health, agriculture, entertainment. These are fields in which Africa is embracing and where we're finding the telecommunication companies are tapping into these opportunities. Renewable energy, to deal with this shortage of electricity, we're finding that Africa's governments are embracing solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and hybrid systems in various sectors, including such as agriculture. Another trend that we're picking up that's slowly becoming more prominent is the one of waste to energy. Africa is sitting with a lot of waste, and it is starting to convert this into electricity generation plants. Value addition, looking at oil, for example, Africa is currently exporting oil and importing the refined product. So value addition is a strong possibility there. And agriculture, again, focus on food security, check on blue ocean economy, and tapping into the sources presented by horticulture and floriculture. Pharmaceutical. Africa is mostly importing medication from abroad, and mostly the generic version. So there is a massive market of, as we've said already, 1.2 billion people growing to 2.4 in 30 years' time, which provides the pharmaceutical companies with scale, which is important when you're looking at this kind of sector. Retail. I always say Africa is empty as far as this is concerned. Many African retailers, however, are struggling outside of their home countries. South African companies that used to be strongly in Africa, Shoprite, Woolworths, Mr. Price, etc., are amongst those that have reduced their footprint in Africa. But on the other hand, you're sitting with Carrefour from, amongst others, the UAE, that has its footprint, that's growing its footprint in Africa and in East Africa, an area where Shoprite, amongst others, are struggling. E-commerce is becoming a major factor as well. And then lastly, infrastructure development. Currently, if you have a look at from the UAE, you're sitting with DP World is tapping into various opportunities in Africa, where they are developing and putting in place and managing ports on behalf of African countries and governments. And the more on the road and railway construction scenario, we're finding a whole number of Chinese construction companies that are tapping into the opportunities presented. So Africa is huge. It is not one country. But in spite of the many challenges we are seeing, there are a whole range of opportunities that currently are being tapped into by a number of other companies from abroad, Singapore, for instance, but a lot more opportunity than is currently being tapped into.
Unbelievable. What did you say that figure was going to get to? About in 30 years' time? 2.70 billion? How many? What did we say?
Population?
Yes.
Yes, 2.4 billion by 2050 and over 4 billion by 2100.
That's unbelievable. That is unbelievable. I mean, the opportunities are absolutely enormous. I mean, it's something that cannot be continuously ignored. It's really those who move now and who move fast are really going to catch that wave. And I think that's what you really are really saying. I believe you also wrote a little bit about the Constitution around it. Is that correct? Did you write a white paper around it?
I wrote a couple of papers around the whole issue of the African continental free trade area. As a matter of fact, but I looked at a perspective from East Africa, where there's a big challenge for Africa in general to really be able to tap into these opportunities. And that is that its political leaders need to demonstrate a much stronger political will to embrace the benefits of regional integration, and then be willing to set aside or to subordinate, rather, national interest to regional interest. And they're struggling with that, which is understandable. You know, in the East Africa, where you sit with the East African community, which is one of the more efficient run regional economic communities, they love to fight one another. And with the former late President John Magufuli, he was very clear. It was Tanzania first. So he was in a constant battle with his member or fellow member states in the East African community. However, his successor immediately embraced the benefits of regional integration and reached out to Kenya, where they are now working at much, or collaborating at a much more mutually beneficial manner than used to be the case.
So getting onto that, I mean, so are we saying that going into Africa is going to become more and more about business and government partnerships that are going to actually be driving the growth of the continent?
Corin, yes. As a matter of fact, the continental free trade area is built on the understanding that the private sector must be involved in a major way, and they need to look at public-private partnerships as much as possible. Governments create a policy or a business enabling policy framework. That's their job. But governments are not there to run businesses. In spite of the fact that we do see that frequently, we at the same time see them not being successful, and I'm being extremely polite by setting in that way. However, the countries where governments are able to put in place the policy frameworks and then allowing the private sector, the business community, to run the scene within the ambit, within the parameters of the policy, we are seeing much greater levels of success.
So it brings me to the next question about what is the broad objective, and how does the overlapping basically, how would the economy sort of grow? What would be the sort of economic growth for these sort of communities, et cetera, et cetera?
Corin, yes, I think that is the whole important issue that we're looking at. If we first look at what is the purpose of a free trade area, a free trade agreement, and that is to enable countries and businesses to benefit from the possibilities that international economic integration offers, or in our case, continental economic integration offers. By removing barriers to trade, mutual gains are generated, they create a bigger market, increase competition, but at the same time, reward economies of scale, which in turn reduces companies and countries to allocate their time and resources more efficiently. Now, if we look at the issues of regional economic communities, Africa doesn't have a scarcity of them. You're sitting with the East African community, looking at the common market of East African states, ECOWAS, I like COMESA. You have economic community of West African states, which is ECOWAS. You have the Southern African Development Community, which is SADC. And these are the prominent ones, the bigger ones. But then you have also the Economic Community of Central African States, ECAS, the Economic and Monetary Community of Central Africa. You have the Community of Sahel-Saharan States. And then in 2015, we also had the tripartite free trade area, which was a combination of COMESA, the East African Community, and SADC. So we've had a whole number, and some of them are more efficient than others, but we are seeing within these a kind of a running conflict. Conflict may be a harsh word, but kind of tiffs where it is clear that national interest frequently becomes the overriding factor at the cost of regional interest. Now, when we look at the African Continental Free Trade Area, it moves back to 2012, where they adopted at the African Union, where it was said, great, the CFTA will now be the flagship project of the AU's Agenda 2063, with the potential or with the purpose of boosting intra-Africa trade, to take the current level of integration of intra-Africa trade rather of 17% and to boost that significantly. But not only are we looking at a trade per se, there are a few other issues as well. So it's going to boost intra-Africa trade by providing a comprehensive and mutually beneficial trade agreement among the member states, which will cover then trade in goods and services, cover investment, intellectual property rights, as well as competition policy. With the average tariffs of 6.1%, businesses currently face higher tariffs when they export within Africa, in other words, when they exercise an intra-Africa trade, than when they export outside. Okay, that's why we find most African trade going to outside of the continent. Now, the agreement entered into force on 30th of May 2019 for the 24 countries rather, that had then deposited their instruments of ratification with the AU Commission chairperson. The AFTCFA will also be governed by 5 operational instruments. The rules of origin, which is about are the products and the inputs from Africa, or a certain critical mass thereof in any case, to prevent countries of importing goods from abroad and then passing them off as own production within Africa. Secondly, you're looking at the online negotiating forum, the monitoring and elimination of non-tariff barriers, which is very important, and the digital payment system and the African Trade Observatory. Now, the AFCFTA will then cover this market of 1.2 billion people. Currently, we said 2.4 in 2015, and a GDP of, depending on who you talk to, between 2.5 and 3.4 trillion dollars across all 55 member states of the African Union. However, only 54 at this stage of the game signed this continental free trade area, with Eritrea being the one not signed. It will be the 8th trading bloc in the world. It will be the largest free trade area since the formation of the WTO, and it started functioning formally on the 1st of January 2021. As I've said, it's not just about trade. It also will deal with other continental initiatives, such as the Protocol on the Free Movement of People, the right to residence, the right to establishment, and then also the Single African Air Transport Market. Now, according to the Economic Commission for Africa, the CFTA is projected to increase the value of intra-African exports. It will be, as such, a game changer for stimulating intra-Africa trade. It is projected that through the sole removal of tariffs, only that, to increase the value of intra-African trade by between 15% or $50 billion US and 25%, which is 70 billion US, depending on the liberalization efforts. And this is by 2040, compared to a situation where there would be no CFTA in place. Another way of looking at it is to say that the share of intra-Africa trade would increase by nearly 40% to over 50%, depending on the ambition of the liberalization between now and 2040. The ECA Economic Commission for Africa estimates that the CFTA has the potential to boost intra-Africa trade by 52.3% by eliminating import duties, and to double this trade if non-tariff barriers are also reduced. So the potential for Africa as a continent is huge, should it be able to put in place everything that is envisaged for the continental free trade area.
So Johan, that's unbelievable. I wonder why have they never done this before? I mean, why has it taken so long? Is this because people wouldn't sign? I mean, why did that other country not sign? Why? Or, I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer to me, you know. So I'm an innocent party here. I don't understand all of this. So because I'm not into import export, but if you can just explain to me a little bit more. Why would a country not sign when there are so many benefits attached?
Corinne, it is easier said than done, first of all. Now, remember that we're looking at post the colonial period, looking at 50, 60 years. So in terms of history, it's actually quite a short period of time. So firstly, that one aspect. Also, you need to understand that in its formative years, there was a lot of jockeying in Africa, for positioning, getting power right, etc. And it takes quite a while. Even if you go back to the EU started with the idea behind it in the 1950s, and it took 50 odd years for the majority, or for a large number of the EU members to come on board. So, you know, it's not just a question of saying, and then within 5 years it is done. Even if you look at the point that it took a decade from once it was said, let's do this, up until where we are now, that since the 1st of January this year, that the CFTA is operational. What you also need to bear in mind is that it is very difficult when you're sitting with a scenario where you have small countries and you have large countries. The large countries always run the potential of being able to dominate the smaller economies. You know, you're looking at a country which I'm a big fan of, such as Rwanda. Rwanda, if you look where they were in 1994 with the genocide, where we're looking at where that 1 million people were killed, and where they are now, 25, 26, 27 years later on. They have grown and developed immensely. However, their economy is about 10 billion US. Now, there's a whole range of economies in Africa. We're looking at 1, 2, 3 billion US. And then you're sitting with the big guys such as Nigeria, over 400 billion. There's South Africa, close to 400 billion. We're sitting with Egypt, the third largest economy, Morocco, another large economy. These are huge economies which run relative to most of the others in Africa. And when you have this imbalance, it is always a challenge to get people together and to put in place mechanisms to ensure that the big players will not dominate and you know, be overbearing in a relationship with the other. So getting that right also took quite a long time. Is it to everybody's benefit? If they can manage to put in place the rules of origin and the trading rules, the exceptions, etc., so that the smaller players will not be dominated by the larger players, it will be a bargain. At this stage of the game, it looks quite positive on paper. So time will tell to what extent we will be able eventually to sort out the niggles, the challenges, the tiffs between the players to ensure that the smaller players are not overrun and dominated by the larger players. What one bear in mind is also that these regional economic communities that I've mentioned, the members thereof will continue to be governed by the unique provisions of those smaller regional economic communities. So the AFCFTA will basically then govern the trade and the other provisions of economic community or non-regional economic community members. So, for example, South Africa is not a member of ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. So, in terms of trade there, that will be governed by the AFCFTA. However, within ECOWAS, the members and their trade will be governed by the provisions of ECOWAS itself and not by the provisions of the AFCFTA.
Well, you know what? The subject is absolutely fascinating. And I mean, I could go on asking you millions of questions and we could be here all day. But you know what? I'm going to reserve that for you for Wednesday night at the SABCO event, which I think is happening, Nelly. Where is it happening? At Media One Hotel? Where is it actually happening?
It is happening at 3 p.m. at the Media One Hotel in Media City, Dubai. And Corin and Johan, I really want to thank you for your time this afternoon. It is so great to have this discussion. And Johan, I'm really looking forward to learn more about this. And I'm sure that many of the business owners would want to know how we can utilize this opportunity and what is the first steps to take to get involved into the opportunity. And as Corin said, to jump on the wagon. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today.